webinar. So again, this is Susan Moeller from BuzzSumo. I am here with Steve Rayson, who is one of our founders, and he's going to be talking to you today about influencer outreach, and particularly how to make it a daily habit in your work life. The webinar today, we are committed to it being a short and useful experience, so we're going to stick to 20 minutes. If you have questions, we will be available afterwards to take more questions. So without any other introduction, Steve, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks again, everyone, for being here.
Great, thanks, Susan. So I'm Steve Rayson, one of the directors at BuzzSumo. My contact details are there on the screen, so any questions we don't cover today, do just fire mail off to me and I'll try and respond. So my challenge is to keep this quite short, to 20 minutes, so we'll see how I do. But what I really wanted to focus on was just talk a little bit about what is an influencer, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about when people talk about influencer marketing, what they actually mean by an influencer. And then I'm going to run through in a practical sense of, how do you identify the people in your area? How do you build an outreach list? And how do you take some initial outreach steps? And I'm going to run through those today, and we'll, between us, take a real example. So if you were here earlier, I was saying I'm going to take a real example and we'll work through it, and we'll build an outreach list together, and we'll take some initial outreach steps. So a bit of a challenge in our 20 minutes, but hopefully we'll do that. So in terms of what is an influencer, I do think there are misconceptions around this. To me, in the context of content marketing, which is generally what we're talking about, an influencer is just somebody who's got the ability to amplify your content. So an influencer isn't somebody who's got 100,000 followers or a huge audience. It's really somebody who's got the ability to amplify your content specifically. And if you can find somebody with 100,000 followers, that's great, of course. But it might be it's just a junior journalist or a junior writer on a major site who can actually mention you and amplify your content in that way. It might be somebody who's got a small engaged audience, but they're a real advocate of what you're doing, so that they're constantly pushing and people respect them, and they're an advocate for your services. So they can be an influencer for you as well, so they can amplify your content. So it's not just really big influencers, and I'll go through in some detail the different types this afternoon. So to me, what matters is the influencer. It's not about how many followers they have, it's whether they have an engaged audience in an area that matters to you or your product or service, really. So it's not about how many followers they have, but about, do they have an audience which is very relevant to you, and do they have some influence in that audience? So this would be great, wouldn't it? So if this is Cristiano Ronaldo, if he recommended BuzzSumo, that would be great. He's got 45 million followers. It's huge. Assume he doesn't manage his own notifications around that. But it probably wouldn't move the needle that much for us, really, because he doesn't have an engaged audience, which is that relevant, I suspect, to what we're talking about in terms of BuzzSumo and content marketing. So it's just finding the relevant influencers for your particular marketplace. Although, Ronaldo, if you're on the webinar, you're really happy to tweet about us. That'll be great. So let's go in practical terms. So how do we find them? How do we find these people that amplify content in your particular area? And I said I would take a practical example. We're actually doing a new product launch later in October of a product called Anders Pink. It's really an app and platform which keeps you and your team informed about the latest in your area or industry. So you can set up briefings on anything such as negative interest rates, influencer marketing, and we'll keep you and your team informed. It's already out in beta, so if you're interested, you can go and log in and have a play with it. But in terms of what the product is, there's an element of it which is about content curation. So here's a briefing we set up on influencer marketing, and it's simply bringing together some of the latest articles about influencer marketing. So just so you understand what we're going to do in terms of our outreach list, we're interested in people who have an interest in content curation, who are experts in content curation. And with Anders Pink, you don't just get the latest articles, you can then further refine your sources. You can bring in keywords, exclude keywords, just want content on influencer marketing tools, or add particular influencers, add RSS feeds, so you can refine down. So basically we're looking at, one of the elements is content curation. So what I want to build is an outreach list about content curation. So this is what I'm going to do today, an outreach list. These are things I would look for. Who are the experts? Who writes about your topic? Also, who shares relevant content in your area? Maybe people who write about it, but there may be people who share and amplify content. And as I said, don't don't forget the advocates of your own content. So who shared your content this month, and who shares your competitors' content as well. So if they're amplifying your competitors' content, maybe they'll amplify your content, and they're suitable people to outreach to. So what I'm going to do is just jump off the slides and take you into to live on the web, which was a bit of a risk, and just show you how I do this on BuzzSumo. And then hopefully you can see what I'm doing and copy this as well if it's relevant to what you're doing. So the first thing I would do is I go to the Influencers tab in BuzzSumo at the top here, and I go to Outreach List, which is the top left. And the first thing I'll do there is create a new outreach list. So I just create an outreach list and give it a name. So I call it Curation Test, and I will create my curation test. So I've now got an outreach list, but it's got no influencers added to it yet. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I've created my list. So the first thing I would do is say, well, who are the experts in this space? So I would come into here and say, okay, let's just type in content curation. So I want to find a few experts as a starting point for my list. And as you probably know, if you use BuzzSumo in any length, you can just find people who are experts just by typing in a topic. And so we can see, for example, here that Robin Good has come up first. He's already on a couple of my lists. He's an expert on content curation. And if I go to Save Influencer, I can now scroll down and tick Curation Test and add him to my list. So he's now added to 3 lists. He's now added to my Curation Test list. You'll also see I've got a few companies here. If I just untick companies on the top left here, and hit search and redo the search, it'll get rid of some of the companies, so it'll give me more individuals. So sometimes I'm looking for individuals rather than specific companies. So that's a quick way of trying to find particular influencers in this space if I want to do that. So I could say, oh, maybe I'll add Michelle into my list as well. So I just tick there, for example, and you can see that Michelle's now added to my curation test. While I'm here, I'd also say sometimes it's really useful to find some people in your target audience. So let's say here I'm looking for content curators. So somebody's got a content curator in their job description, or they've put it in their Twitter bio. And now I get back a list of people who have content curator in their Twitter bio. So they may not always be relevant, but occasionally there may be people here actually in my target audience who could also be an influencer, because they're hopefully passionate about content curation. So I've got one person here with 16,000 followers. Let's just add them into my list. This person also looks relevant. They're a strategist, content curator. They're into PR. They've got 23,000 followers. So maybe I'll add Pam in there as well. So I'm starting to build a little list of people here. Another thing that I can do, which might be useful, is actually I can just filter down and just see journalists on the left-hand side here. So if I research journalists who are also content curators, I now get a list of people who are journalists, but they also have content curator in their bio. So, okay, so let's say maybe this person here, I would have a look at. Normally I'd spend a bit of time looking at their individual CV, but I'm now finding people who are journalists, but are also content curators. So I'll add Ginny here as well. So I've started to build my outreach list. Now I've started to build some people who are experts, who are journalists in this space. The next thing that I would do is go and have a look at, who are the writers in this space. So who are the writers who are getting their content well shared? So I would start here with doing a search. Maybe I would just do content curation would be a starting point. And I can see, as you'll know from BuzzSumo, what content's resonating around content curation. So I could see the most shared content on content curation. Alternatively, what I could do is maybe I'll just look at content curation strategy. I want to look at something more specific and look at the authors of that. So now I can start to see some of the authors here, such as Michael here, for example, about content strategy. So I could start to identify specific authors that I wanted to basically engage with, and I can do past year if I wanted to go back further than the past 6 months, for example. So I can find key authors. The other thing I can do is very specifically I can find people who shared relevant content. So let's say 8 tips for winning a content curation strategy. That's really relevant for what we're going to be doing for my outreach list. So only 55 people shared this on Twitter, but I can view those sharers. It'll show me who shared that content. Now, let's sort by number of followers to see if there are any people with reasonable followings who's sharing that content who might be of interest to me. And I suppose at least one person here is relevant. So Jill here, or Gail, sorry, Gail here is a content social marketing strategist. Looks very relevant to me and has shared obviously content curation content. So if they shared that, maybe they'll share this for me. So I've added them to my list as somebody I might want to build a relationship with. So okay, so I just go back to my content that's resonating. The other thing that I might be interested in, and I am particularly interested in for this on content creation, is what articles about content curation tools are there out there? Because Anders Pink is one element of its content curation, so we want to appear on these lists. So I really want to start to identify some of the people who are writing these list posts about curation tools, and I really would like to build a relationship with them. So I can see here Cindy from SEMrush, and Smarty, who I happen to know, has published a post, and so Sujan Patel, again, two people I happen to know. So it'd be good to build relationships with those people because I didn't know they were writing specifically around content curation tools. So what I can do is go back into my influencers, and I can search for Anne first, for example. So let's just search for Anne. And so I found Anne here, and now I'm just going to add her to my curation test list as well. But I can also search by Twitter handle if I want, so I can search for Sujan as well. I happen to know his Twitter handle. Sometimes you may have to look it up and search for it. So let me save him to my list as well. So what I've started to do now is just add a few people who write good articles specifically about the topics I'm interested in, and I want to build relationships with them because it might even be as simple as asking Anne or Sujan to update their list of curation tools and add Anders Pink in if they think it's relevant to do that. The next step I would take is an audience builder, and this is a great little tool I think in BuzzSumo. I'm interested in people who are sharing content about content curation. So what I can do is say, maybe I'll be very specific. I want to build an audience of people in the last 6 months who've shared content about content curation tools. So that we go back, look through the whole database, and we find everyone who shared an article about content curation tools. So I can be quite specific. It doesn't have to be about just content curation. And so I can now begin to see people who shared content, and I can even see what they've shared. So this person shared 8 traffic boosting content creation tools, for example. And so as I scroll down, I've got a lot of people in this list. I can start to look at, are any of these people relevant to me? Because they're clearly helping to share some relevant content. So I might say this person here that actually they may be interested. I may be able to build a relationship with them as well because they're sharing relevant things. Oh, and this is a good one. This is Brian. I actually happen to know Brian. So he's shared 10 content curation tools. So in due course, I could mail Brian and say, look, Brian, you shared this article here. Would you like to be interested in this particular article that I'm writing about content curation tools or something along those lines? The other nice thing about the audience builder, if I click to build a new audience, is I can see who our advocates are. So we've got a blog up. We've only got a few posts up there so far. But I can now build an audience of anybody who's shared our content. So it's now going to build me a little Twitter list of anybody who's shared our content as a company or as Anders Pink. And I can now begin to see people who are sharing it. So you may have a few people who are passionate advocates who you want to build and thank for sharing your content, for example, and you can go down and see who shared it in the last month, for example. So let's just say Mike here is somebody, again, who might be one of our advocates who can share other things for us. And I think our most famous one of this, Susan did a little search, I think, for one of our clients in terms of who'd shared their content in the past month, and actually top of the list was Lady Gaga, and they didn't even know that Lady Gaga had shared their article. So it's a chance to at least say thank you and those sorts of things. So it could be really useful to see who's sharing your content, because often you have more friends than you think you have. And the other thing you can do here, of course, is it's not just your domain. You can look at competitors. Curata's not really a competitor of ours. It's a slightly different tool. They've got a complete content tool. But they do write about content curation. So what I can also do is get together a list of people who shared their content. So I can now say, actually, there's some interesting people here who are sharing their content and may be useful to share our content. So I've now gone beyond experts, etc., to see who's sharing articles about content curation, who are our own advocates, and also who's sharing some competitors' content. So I now have an outreach list. So if I click back here on the top left, outreach lists, down here we've got curation test, and between us we've added 13 people to that list of curation test. And now this enables me to then start to connect with them every single day. So the first thing I do is, here's my list, here's my 13 people we've put into our little content curation outreach list. And sometimes you don't need more than 20 or so people in your list. You can see that I've got 14 people in my BuzzSumo list who I regularly share their content. So the first thing I can do is, if I don't follow these people, I can follow them directly within BuzzSumo. So I can start to follow them on Twitter. So the very first thing I would do is follow them on Twitter. And I might start to retweet some of their content. But what I find really useful and powerful, and BuzzSumo makes this super efficient, is if I click on content here at the top, what it does is it shows me the content people on my list are publishing. So it shows me the latest content they've published. So I can see that Robin Good has published a content curation official guide 16 hours ago. So I can go to that article, I can check it out, I can comment on it, and I like to comment on blogs if I can, but I can also share it and mention them when I'm sharing it. So here's now one from Gail, and I can see that Gail's actually publishing on different places. That's All Business, that's inbound.org. So I don't have to go to lots of places. I can now see in one single place everything my outreach list are publishing. And then each morning, so it's the first thing I do every morning is, I know people look for things to share, but the first thing I do is I look at the content being published by people on my outreach list. And my priority for sharing is actually their content, even before my content, because I want to make sure I'm being helpful to them every morning. So every morning I come in and I look at this. So that's a really good way of just starting your relationship building. And you can do things outside of BuzzSumo, of course. So you can search LinkedIn. So I did a search on LinkedIn for people who are content curators. And there are some really interesting people. This person's a content curator for a major newspaper group. I then looked him up on Twitter, and then I can add him to my content list, for example. So you can do some of these things outside of BuzzSumo as well. So just to recap, going back into the slides, I'm conscious I'm heading towards my 20 minutes, so there's still a bit to go through. So we created a list. We looked at experts. We looked at authors and journalists. We looked at people who share content. We looked at people who shared our content, people who share competitor content. We also looked at people in the potential target audience. And we're checking now every morning. We have a task to check what they publish and share and comment. So every morning we've got new content to keep commenting and sharing to build that relationship. And my view is you take slow initial outreach steps. You follow them. So you tweet and share content. You comment on their content and their blogs. I would start to do things like recommend them as well in my content. And I personally really like to meet them at events. I try, if I see they're talking anywhere, I try to get to the event, even if it's just to say at the end of the session, thanks, really love your stuff. I think it builds a different connection once you've met them personally. And then you'd start to build that relationship. Now, this is a whole other webinar, really, but I'll just run through some of the tips from me here. And the key to me is that your starting point is always, okay, I have an outreach list. My starting point is, how can I help them? Not, will you share my content? Which is a terrible way to start. It's, how can you help them? So what can I now do? I've built this list for Anders Pink. How can I start to help this list? Obviously, I'm sharing their content. That's my initial outreach steps. What I can do is offer them free or discounted use of the services. So would you like free access to Anders Pink or BuzzSumo? You may have services or apps that you can provide free to some of your outreach lists. So I'm trying to be helpful, give them something they can use. I can also find ways of actively helping them. In my case, I may have data. So did you realize that some of the best influencer marketing articles this month were X or Y? Did you see the most shared content was something? I can provide data, and I've had good success, particularly with junior journalists, of offering to help them and saying, you know, I've got lots of data. If you're interested in the most shared content or the most shared websites on particular topics, I'm happy to do that research for you. And I've had really good feedback from that, and people including us in articles. So I'm actively trying to help them. You can also do things by researching and sharing insights before they're public. So I'm just doing another research report at the moment, and I've got a number of influencers I'll share the findings with before it goes public, so they can prepare a post if they want to comment on it. And you could do the same even if you've got a beta product coming out. It's good to give them a sense of being an insider with you, that you're sharing things with them before other people. You're giving them some help there. They've got an advanced look at things. if you don't know them, you don't get to meet them at an event, I like to seek an introduction through a connection if I can. And often, LinkedIn's so good these days. Often you do find people who have connections who can introduce you. Um, and then you can start to do things like ask them if you can interview them for your website. You might start by just listing 10 content curation experts to follow and make sure you've listed them. I would never start with this. By this stage, I'm normally 3, 4, 5 months in often before I interview them for the website, but sometimes it may be 2 or 3 months. But you could ask to interview them, and it might be an in-depth one, or it could be a roundup post with content curation tips from 5 experts. Ultimately, you're trying to get them to then contribute content if you want. Maybe they would write a guest post for you, but this is a more advanced stage. And ultimately, you want to be collaborating on content. And so we've had great joy with this of building relationships in this way. I mean, we're a relatively new tool. We're only a few years old at BuzzSumo, but we've built relationships with the likes of Mari Smith and Larry Kim, who are quite big influencers and wonderful to work with. And we've done joint webinars with them, and that's our ultimate aim, to build a relationship slowly over time and run joint webinars, because we then leverage their email lists, our email lists, and we reach a lot of people. So that's where we try to get to. So I say that I'm not saying this is best practice, I'm just saying this is what I do, and I hope it's helpful to you. So I would map the landscape. I would particularly look at who my audience respects. They might be experts, they just might be people who share and amplify content, but particularly find people who work best for your audience. There may be a location fit in your case, and you should search by location. It may be they're focused on a very particular niche area, but then create your outreach list. And I'd say once you have your outreach list, it's your responsibility every single morning to be looking at what they're publishing, sharing and making contact. Obviously, you're not sharing content from the same person every day, but across your list of, say, 20 people, you're regularly sharing content, building relationships, being visible to your audience, and then gradually building a relationship with them over time. So they're my tips on what I do and how I use BuzzSumo to do that. I hope it's been of interest. And Susan, happy to pick up any questions that people have. I think I just went over my 20 minutes, so I'm sorry for that.
Early tomorrow. Now, another question is, how do you get influencers excited about your product or service and on board with your campaigns? One idea that BuzzSumo has used, and Steve, I'll just jump in here, is what
Sure.
Steve mentioned earlier of offering people a chance to take a look at our product, and so that's been one of the ways that we've done that. Another is to really pay close attention to what influencers are asking and make sure that we're giving them good customer service, if you will, demonstrating how to use the product. Would you like to add anything there, Steve?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's also if you get to know the influencer, you know what they're interested in. So for example, for Mari Smith, who's interested in Facebook, we
Uh-huh.
could do a lot of data research and then share research with her, which she could share with her audience, because we know that her audience would be interested in that. We did a similar thing for Neil Patel. We said, look, with the data we have, we can pull 1 billion Facebook posts, literally 1 billion, and tell you what time of days work best, whether images work better than videos, etc. And he really liked that. And so we pulled all the data for him. So we did a lot of the heavy legwork, and he published that on Kissmetrics. I think it's still his best, most shared piece of content, but we pulled all the research. So we sort of try to understand what they and their audience want. So yeah, we try to help them in that way so they can see what benefits we can deliver.
Yeah, that's great. Another question from Emily: is it best to engage with influencers on multiple platforms, sort of attack from multiple angles, or pick one platform and don't bombard? Great question, Emily. What would you say,
Yeah,
Steve?
Yeah, I wouldn't bombard them from different platforms. I would occasionally use different platforms, but often for different influencers. I think you have to be really careful. I mean, firstly, I've got to know a few of the bigger influencers, and they really get a bit fed up with people keep contacting them. I mean, because everybody does, and I think that's the real problem if you target a really big influencers. That they get a lot of attention. So I think often picking niche influencers, someone who's shared particular content, someone who's got a small audience but an engaged audience, can be very powerful as well. So I think you have to be careful about how you approach them. And so my approach is always, how can you help them? So that's your starting point, is not how can they help you. Your starting point is how can I help them? So, this is my influencer. How can I help them? Because if I help them, that in turn over time gets reciprocated. So I would build the relationship slowly. I wouldn't ask for anything for at least a few months, even especially a share of content or something. I would just try to be helpful to them over a 2 or 3 month period and build the relationship. And I would probably do it through a single platform, probably. Although if I saw them publish something on LinkedIn, I might comment on the article, but I comment in a helpful way rather than say, please share my article.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think we'll have time for one other question. Um, let's see. Here's an interesting one. I mean, they're all interesting, but this is do you think influencers are sharing less because they're figuring out people are using them because of their influencer status, or do you think they're happy to help if it's relevant to them?
I think there are a lot of really good people out there who are keen to help you, but they are bombarded, some of the really big ones. And the ones I know they begin to get frustrated by is, could you contribute a tip so I can write an article on 10 tips from the experts in the hope those 10 experts share it? It used to work, but people are getting a little bit tired now of, I've just had 2 through today, and I'm not an influencer, but 2 people mailed me saying, can I share a tip on something? And that is becoming a bit tired, really. But I think they are keen to help. But I would say the strong point again is, if you can help them, you can get that reciprocated. But yeah, and I think they're also becoming conscious, particularly the big ones, of it's hard to reach audiences these days. There's so much content out there. I think there really is content shock. Influencers are one way, ads are getting blocked, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the bigger influencers are now becoming much more commercial, and possibly rightly so, and charging for their services. And there are different rates for different influencers. So yes, I think they're becoming slightly more commercial about it, and there probably is a little bit of less free sharing. But that doesn't apply to all influencers. There are a lot of people out there who are just really keen to help you.
That's great. So we do so appreciate your time today. We appreciate your feedback on this webinar, and especially are glad that you're able to get logged on time. We are going to end today, but we will also let you know about other 20-minute sessions we have planned, and hope that you'll be able to join us for those as well. Thanks so much for the time. Look for an email from us in the next day. And again, we appreciate you being here with us. Thanks so much, Steve.
Great, thanks. Thanks, everyone.